Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining for our webinar. What are information security controls and how do they reduce cyber risks? I'm Khaled and I will be your host for the day. Our speaker for the session, Mr. Alexandre Horvath, Chief Information Security Officer and Data Protection Officer at Bcryptics AG. Please note that the session will be in listen-only mode and will last for about 40 minutes, out of which last 30 minutes will be dedicated to Q&A. Requesting all the participants to post your questions in the Q&A window. Should you need any assistance during the webinar, please use the chat box. Also, do note we have two criteria for certification. First, participants need to attend the complete webinar. Second, fill in the survey and the right answers to all the three questions based on the webinar, which will be sent to you one day post the session. Now about our speaker. Alexander has over 15 years of experience in cybersecurity and IT risk management in building and sustaining pragmatic global corporate cybersecurity programs. He is able to set strategic direction on IT security and provide leadership and oversight of data breach issues. As an executive leader of an IT risk management, Alexander implemented customized policy framework, compliance plans, incident handling, third-party management, awareness campaigns and trainings, and risk mitigation tools. Based on his flair for new technologies and excessive IT expertise, he understands the need for cybersecurity in the process of the digital transformation. As a communicator, Alexander successfully shares both experience and know-how with all the involved stakeholders. Now I will hand over the section to you, Alex. Over to you.
Thank you, Khaled. Well, also from my part, very warm welcome to this Cyber Talk webinar. Well, then let's jump in. I hope you can all see my slides. So as Khaled already said, topic today is what are information security controls and how do they reduce cyber risks? I mean, it's quite a broad topic, and yeah, I hear also a lot about it, and there are also a lot of changes, but we will get to that just in a second. So let's jump in. So first of all, we have to do some definition work, I guess, before we actually talking about information security controls. Otherwise, it's a bit of broad theme, and a lot of people understand sometimes slightly some differences. So basically, information security controls are definitely safeguards or countermeasures implemented to minimize, detect, avoid, or counteract information security risks, including data theft, information system breaches, and unauthorized access. So, I mean, that's just some examples, so it's not the finishing list. And these security controls help protecting the integrity, availability, and confidentiality of data and networks. So the famous CIA triad, I'm sure some of you are also familiar with that. Well, it's always very important that all data we have, and obviously also the networks, are very well protected to assure integrity, availability, and confidentiality, mainly actually of our data. So it's often actually going towards those three terms. So if we go further, so what are actually information security controls? I mean, it's a bit similar what we just saw in the definition, obviously, otherwise we would have a big discrepancy, which wouldn't be good. But basically, these are measures taken to reduce information security risks. So once you set up controls, I mean, once they're also working, yeah, well, the risk in terms of either getting attacked or to face a breach, they should definitely reduce. So that should be the main goal. Obviously, you want to protect, as I already said, the CIA triad. So basically, your crown jewels, and more that's mainly your data you're using. And yeah, so a lot of questions I get or are asked in the beginning. So how do I find out which controls are important for us? And that's normally typically done by a risk assessment, and we will come to that later. And those risk assessments normally, well, shouldn't. You can create your own controls if you want to, but I strongly well, would recommend that you use any kinds of security standards. So the most common ones are, I guess, NIST or ISO. So if you use NIST, there are roughly about 100 controls. If you use ISO 27000, there are 114 controls. Again, even if you, well, maybe you get a bit shocked about the numbers, but you have to read carefully through the full standard, which means, I mean, there are some areas maybe which are not relevant to you, because let's say if you're not using any kind of wireless network, because you're a bit used to more the physical cable, well then the whole wireless section won't be applicable for you. So and then you will definitely have less than 114. And well, once you actually want to get certified also towards that kind of standard, you normally also start with a statement of applicability, which means you are actually picking all the controls which you really want to have and which also will be certified or assessed. So this document is very important. So you really clearly state which controls you want and which ones you don't want. So that's also important to know. So yeah, so that's basically how you start. So you basically first you do your risk assessment, hopefully also using a standard. If you go to the next slide, you can slowly also a bit see how this works. So risk assessment normally, as I said already before, is this process used to identify and evaluate risks and its potential effects. Obviously, if we look at the picture below of this slide, you can see that there's a vulnerability identification. Obviously, that's always good if you do this before an attacker actually finds your vulnerabilities. But this can either be done on a technical level or on a more manual level, or even by an external, let's say if you also do penetration testing. They normally also find a couple of vulnerabilities and obviously will then also do a results analysis. And based on that, they will actually hand over the kind of risk assessment documentation, telling you which ones are major, minor, or kind of in the middle. And obviously, then it's up to the company to do the remediation work and to implement them as well. So either you have a IT security or IT well-equipped IT team who can actually do the remediation themselves. Sometimes some recommendations are also to buy any kind of security software. So anyhow, you have to do some evaluation, or you will need some help from a third party, or you will get some external help anyhow because you don't have a dedicated cybersecurity specialist, so they can actually implement it for you as well. So yeah, so that's really important that you do this risk assessment to also get a kind of a feeling how well you actually structured. I also get a lot of questions asking me, how should we start with the whole risk assessment? And normally it's really, and a lot of are afraid that they're very weak, but I mean, at one point you have to start, and that's basically your baseline, and starting from that, you building kind of with a gap analysis you also find out where you should actually invest most, because I mean, if you want to implement controls and you have some domains which are really not very well so far set up, like let's say business continuity management or incident handling management, then you should maybe also start with them. It will also show you which domains are actually take longer. You can also do a kind of better roadmap or a whole how you want to implement it. And I mean, in terms of if you also have to implement a lot of external, as I said before, either hardware or software, it will also give you a better timeline how to handle it. And also, if you have to present it to your board or to C-level, it's also nice. You can also show them how much it will cost and how long it will take. So those things are also well, not to. You should also keep it in mind before you start implementing. Good. So, what are actually the types of information security controls? Well, normally you hear a lot of those three, so preventive, detective, and corrective security controls. Yeah, well, some are kind of more clear than others. We will then, well, in a couple of minutes also look at the kind of overview where you will actually see the types and forms, whereas I really want to show you, well, in a more practical way, what can controls be in terms of, and also matching it, so kind of a matrix how these things works together. So if we look at the first one, preventive security controls, well, this is kind of the normal stuff, or let's say, yeah, just everybody wants to prevent. So this is normally designed to protect cybersecurity incidents. So this is kind of, well, not really rocket science. That's what normally you would do without, well, bigger efforts, I would say. I mean, everybody wants to, well, is closing normally closing his door when he's leaving his house or his flat. You close it with your key, and well, that's why I'm saying it's kind of also preventing a normal thing to do. So if you leave it open, well, yeah, then you did it personally a big breach by not closing your door. The second point is the detective security control. So this is already a little bit more, sometimes also tricky, but with technical help, you can also do a lot of things, like actually also set up honeypots for intruders. So you basically see when they're working, so you caught them in flagranti, so that would mean they're still, well, actually breaching your network, and but you already found that well, somebody's tried to, well, get into your honeypot, but obviously you set it up just to find well, these intruders, and so you really see what they're doing, which is kind of nice if you also want to see what they would steal, and you can also trace them back. You have a better audit log. You can obviously also well, do some research during this incident. But well, yeah, it's, as I said, it's a tricky thing. You really need a really strong cybersecurity, because well, they could already be also in your network doing other stuff. So that's why detective security controls are more tricky. And then obviously corrective security controls. This is obviously a lot to do with well, resilience. So I mean, if you have like you're doing some backups, if you have good backup history, obviously if you well, will be hit by a ransomware attack, you're very well structured, because I mean, even if they encrypt your whole data, if you have a good backup, you can restore your data, let's say in a half day, in a day, and you're up and running. So the damage you will have is not that big, so to say. So that would be a corrective security control. Nevertheless, hopefully you will also do others homework and clean up, and so that you won't get hit by ransomware again. So, but that would be an example for a corrective security control. If we look now at the forms of information security controls, here we have basically four types: access and physical controls, procedural controls, technical controls, and compliance controls. So yeah, also to give you some examples, obviously physical controls is quite, well, that changed also a lot lately, because obviously a lot of us are sitting now at home, so it's not like in the, well, a year ago where everybody was actually sitting at his desk, I guess, at the company, and that company obviously you could also guard, well, by either a guard in front or having somebody at the front desk looking who is entering and leaving the building. Obviously, you had more kind of also physical security in terms of you needed a badge to enter. Maybe you also had access to a couple of floors, not the whole building, and so on. You had perimeter fences, and so on. So at home, normally things are, well, not that much locked up, and yes, you have other things to look at. That's why I'm saying a lot of things also change a bit. Procedural controls, and this is also a big part or an important part, because well, I always say, I mean, the weakest links normally is unfortunately still human factor. So as long as well, you definitely need to do also security awareness education for your employees. Also here, a lot of things changed because we do a lot of remote work nowadays. So you did definitely also have to show them what the threats are out there when you're using your maybe also own machine or well, your hopefully also VPN access and so on. So, and they obviously also have to protect their endpoint. So those are new things which, well, the employees have to face. And I would also say what shouldn't be also forgotten is that unfortunately we can't um, um, well, the communication is also important. So which means you're before you were sitting very close to your IT department, and now obviously well, you're sitting alone at home. So things also get a little bit more either complicated or take longer. Which means if you need any IT help, I mean maybe you still have an IT operator somewhere. But I mean, if you need new hardware, it will also take longer to actually get it because before in the company, you could just either go up to your IT department that they could give it to you directly, and now maybe they even have to ship it. So it's also a thing which is changing. Technical controls, that's also very important. Obviously, there are also a lot of technical things which are helping, like the multi-factor authentication. Always use it if it's possible. Obviously, other things are kind of standard, hopefully, antivirus or firewalls. Well, I've also been to a couple of clients, and there I didn't even find antivirus on their Macs, or because they were convinced that Macs are very secure. So yeah, so unfortunately, there's still a lot to do, and also, well, it's good to have technical well controls and also protection, but nevertheless, it's still somebody also has to control it. I also once was at the client side and where they used actually metal detectors when you entered the building. And yeah, first day I entered there, I also took off everything I had on me, I guess, and put it in the basket and passed. And the next day I went to the client. I saw that a lot of employees just walked through, and actually there was nobody holding them off. So that that's just an example also from actually that you have a control, even a technical control, but if you don't implement it right, well, there's no use having that control. So it's also important for those forms of security controls that once you set them up, obviously also somebody has to look that they're also working. And that brings you to the last point, the compliance control. Obviously, if you have well, they should also look at privacy laws, or as I said before, cybersecurity frameworks. Maybe you also have internal compliance controls. So that's also important that they are, well, that you have a couple of controls towards compliance. I mean, there's also terms of C-level. If you actually want to go for ISO 27001 certification, every year C-level has actually to look at the internal policies or IT policies and also sign them off. So that's a huge thing, which some companies will neglect a little bit to do. But if you take it seriously, everybody is responsible, and even also C-level should also know their task and responsibilities, and also well do that. Okay, so that brings me to this matrix or table where I try to bring those two the types and the forms together. So if we look at the first one, the preventive and the access physical controls, as you can see that obviously, well, how could you prevent that somebody enters your building or your flat? Well, use fences, gates, locks, or nowadays even biometrics. So, well, people it will be harder for intruders actually to get in. If we stay in this form and look at the detective controls, obviously you can use surveillance cameras, which means even if somebody is actually doing or robbing your house, you have it on camera, or you could see it in real time. So that's more the detective control, and then obviously corrective if well, your fences are obviously well damaged, you should definitely repair them. And for buildings or enterprise buildings, you obviously can reissue access cards. So that also happened once at also a client of mine. There was a hotel who where well, intruders actually also well, terminated basically their card issuing machine. So basically, well, nobody could well, use their access cards anymore. So basically, they had to go in with their physical keys. Obviously, the hotel still had physical keys, but you can imagine if you have 400 guests, and I don't know, in 300 rooms, yeah, you need a lot of stuff to actually open all the doors. So, and well, if we continue to procedural controls, preventive types, obviously, well, one of obviously my favorites, awareness campaigns. Well, here again, well, it's very important, and I know some have already kind of a fatigue, but the good thing is a lot of well, threats are not just concerning us in our professional life, but also personal life. So I guess people are more and more aware about cybersecurity, but nevertheless, you have really to tell them what to do and what they shouldn't do, especially if you're doing any kind of phishing campaigns, but also using the latest webinars to show them the newest threats, and if possible, also to customize those campaigns, not just do it always for everybody, but maybe also for your back office, maybe also for your C-level, or even for your IT developers. So that makes well, it also more fun to them, because normally, well, depending on the size of your company, a couple of well, employees are obviously more aware than others, and they will be bored if they have to do the standard cybersecurity training. So normally developers, they know quite a lot about it, and you should also tell them what they should look at. Another preventive is obviously business continuity plan testing. So if you already have one, it's already good. But if you never tested it, it's not well. It can fire kind of backwards, because obviously, if you have to run the testing basically in a real case scenario, yeah, a lot of time and precious time could be gone. So I always also recommend to test the business continuity plan, because I guess version 1 is normally not your last version, and once you did some testing, you will find a lot of things you can well, actually improve. Normally, also I also recommend to do any kind of checklists, which you will also only know or once you actually did the testing. So because well, in an emergency situation, you don't want to read the whole continuity plan anyhow, but checklists are normally the best thing to do. Then the detective, well, procedural controls obviously are simulated phishing attacks. That is really a nice thing to do, which I also like to do. Is setting up obviously well, fake phishing emails to check if your well, your employees are actually, they know what's happening. Here again, it's also recommended not to send well, one phishing email to everybody at the same time, because that's way too obvious. Okay, nowadays when we do remote work, obviously it's not that easy as well. But before, when everybody was sitting next to each other, and you're sending simultaneous phishing email, or exactly the similar one at the same time, obviously the first one will see it, maybe click on it, and the second one will already know from the other that this was a phishing. So it's really good to have actually a kind of well, use something where you can actually send um, individual attacks and also different emails. So that's really better. That's makes things more difficult, obviously, for the employees. It's also not your goal is not just to do finger pointing and tell everybody, well, you clicked on it, but at the end of the day, you want to make it as realistic as it is. And well, if somebody actually clicks on the link, it's better to click it during a simulated attack than in a real case scenario. CM is obviously also a detective control, where events obviously are locked and managed. And if you go further to the corrective procedural controls, obviously setting up an automated incident response process is also important. You can also include it in your ticketing system, which is also quite nice. But here it's also important to separate security incidents to a specific degree. So not just to have all. You just mentioned security. It was a security incident, but then you break it down like it was malware, maybe ransomware, and so on. So you also, or maybe you even a device was stolen, and so on. So it's better also to do then any kind of analysis later if you have a little bit more generic incident setup. And then obviously also adapting your business continuity plan, as I said before. So by creating checklists and so on. Otherwise, again, it's already better to have a business continuity plan which is not tested than nothing. But again, in an emergency case, time is very precious, and everything should really work which is in there. And so you will actually not lose too much time. Then the technical controls in preventive way, kind of which is, as I said, baseline firewall antivirus, intrusion preventive system, multi-factor authentication, hardening IT infrastructure. Well, it's getting more and more implemented, which is nice. So this will definitely prevent from an easy entering, I would say. Detective, as I said, intrusion detective system, or the honeypots, which I mentioned already before. So, if an intruder tries to get into your network, hopefully you set your honeypot in that way that they think your crown jewels are on there. And as I said, you would even see the intruder doing or setting up things, configuring his whatever he wants access to, and what kind of data he actually is looking at. So as long as he's doing it, as I said, you have a better audit trail, and you could also actually respond to that attack. Then corrective controls, obviously patching this vulnerability. So if you have a server who is not using the latest patches, obviously do that. Obviously, also one corrective could also be reboot the system, because it's something didn't work as it should have on the system, or it really needs a reboot, and then it already function again properly. Or then quarantine and malware to do some the issue is definitely gone, and you still can do some follow-up. Or then using your backups, as I said before, that would also be a corrective control. Then the last one, compliance controls. In preventive type, you can hopefully have hiring and termination policies where you can quickly also where employees also know what they have to do when they actually start or stop working. Hopefully you also have separation of duties. That's also very important. Here normally one of my favorite is always the apprentice who starts at the company, or let's say in a bank, and then during his first year he goes he can go through let's say 5 departments, and gathers a lot of also access controls, obviously, and at the end he has more than his superior, and then he can actually do some transaction by himself. So that won't be good. Then obviously also data classification. That's always also a topic I hear a lot. A lot of people are a bit afraid to actually classify their data. I think it will be more and more important also in future to have a clear data classification, because if we classified it from the beginning, it's also easier also to protect it, because then if we classify with a tag that it's confidential or high confidential data, then obviously we could do already we could protect it in a better way from the beginning, because the system would already know clearly that it's highly classified data. So yeah, that's, I think, but I mean, there are also technical ways to do it. So some say also it's too much asked from an individual or user to actually classify his data. And sometimes also data actually changes from highly classified to at the end even external. So that's also one thing which has to be considered. Then detective controls are obviously security audits, like reviewing of access rights. Like I said before, if nobody is looking at that the apprenticeship's access rights, he will just keep it forever. So from time to time, somebody should really also validate that those access rights, if they're still used, and if not, obviously they have to turn it off or deactivate it. Audit logs and unauthorized changes is also important. I mean, it's good if the system actually logs everything, but at the end of the day, somebody should at least look at those logs as well, especially also for developers or global admins or who have really control of everything. So have a look at them as well, at least who logged on and what did they do. So that so you're sure that nobody's creating any kinds of funny things or things which shouldn't run on your network. Corrective controls, implementing obviously a business continuity plan would be really helpful, and using also an incident response plan that would definitely help in terms of controls. Okay, so the next two slides, actually, I talked a lot about how you could implement things and so on. So the next two slides are actually two slides which are, more practical ways. So this is in Azure, actually. So what Microsoft is actually offering you if you use Microsoft 365. So from their side, what they're giving you, they have a kind of compliance manager tool, which you can obviously use. And what they do from their side is they're guaranteed, because obviously you're using a lot of technical infrastructure from Microsoft, you also want to get some assurance that they're doing things right. So what are they doing? If you select ISO 27001, you can see what kind of controls they're using here, and I picked that too. Obviously, they have more, but you can see, obviously they have their control ID from the ISO 27001. You can see here, and it's also which is quite nice, also show you the supported GDPR article and others even. So that's quite nice if you also compare it to other standards. So here we have the control title secure logon processes, which they obviously score very high, but because it's also very important control, obviously. So they implemented it, and the last test they did, which was done actually by a third-party independent auditor, was on the 31st of August 2018. And obviously they passed the result. So as we know that the certification has to be redone every 3 years, there should actually soon be a new test date, hopefully, by the third party independent auditor telling us they're still doing, or this technical secure logon process is still working as it should. And then obviously the test date will actually go up. So that's how it works. And below you can see the same, just for user registration, deregistration. Here, obviously, it's not that critical, so that compliance score is a little bit lower. But again, the identical third-party independent auditor did obviously the test, and they passed. So this is actually done by Microsoft. So you get already scoring by them, but you can actually improve your scoring. So by the tenant, you can see here also all the articles which are obviously important to you. So use of secret authentication information, or information access restriction, or secure logon procedures, which we already had done by the technical part by Microsoft. If we take the last one, so we can also see that here we also have related controls even more. You can see HIPAA is also mentioned, or NIST. And you can then also assign this specific control to whoever is actually working in your enterprise, and you can also manage. You can also well, upload the documents if you want to. You can then also well, put an implementation date on it, and it was implemented, or you can also mention it's not applicable for you, or well, it's not, let's say, well, it's you, or you have something else implemented and so on. So you can select here a couple of things. Then obviously you can do a test, and yeah, hopefully you will pass. But obviously test result you can also well, there are a couple of other things you can select, like not did not pass, or there's some hiccups or whatever. And once you did that, it will automatically actually calculate your compliance score. And yeah, so it's quite nice also to see on a technical side what how how high your compliance score is. And as I said before, if you also want to get a certification, this would already be a very good way to use, because you could actually, well, show it to the auditors and telling them if you're very well also documented um, how you set up the ISO 27001 framework. So I think this is also one thing I wanted to share, not just to talk about those things in a theoretical level, but also how things are actually done. So if you're using, well, this, as I said, is Microsoft 365 on Azure. So if you, but you can also use the big ones like AWS or Google Cloud, and they have similar things. I'm just saying, if you're considering going towards cloud solutions, maybe that's also one thing you could consider to see if you're compliant and using information security controls. Okay, having said that, I think I'm at the end. Hopefully it was well, very informative for you, and then I'm open actually for any questions.
Thank you so much, Alex.